Hello, and welcome to an all new episode of Desperate for Attention. I am your host, Leslie Simon, and you are the wind beneath my wings. That's right, you are the name of a Bette Midler song, which happens to be from a movie called Beaches, and I have not seen it in, I'm gonna say maybe like 20 years, if not more, but I cannot imagine a better child acting performance than Mayim Bialik. I'm sorry, I said it. I mean, yeah, there was that girl in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. She was good. She was good. But you put her against Mayim Bialik playing a young Cece Bloom in Beaches, and I would like to see what the judges say. Now that I think of it, Beaches does have more in common with the subject of today's episode than I initially thought. But before we get into the connection, let me just unwrap some duster refills so we can take care of some very light housekeeping. If you aren't already following Desperate for Attention on your preferred podcasting platforms, what are you waiting for? Be a peach and subscribe to the podcast, and make sure those notifications are turned on so you don't miss anything DFA related. If you fancy yourself an overachiever, why not leave us a comment, share with the peeps in your favorite group chat, or throw a rating our way? For all you astrology buffs out there, the number 5 is strongly linked to the planet Mercury, which represents communication, intellect, and adaptability. And doesn't that all sound amazing? So let's just go with the number 5. You can also find us on Instagram and YouTube at Desperate for Attention Pod. Okay, back to the topic of this week's episode, which does have a slight connection to Beaches when you think about it, because if you have seen Beaches, then you know when I say CC Bloom, you think red hair. Speaking of iconic redheads who understood the power of a signature look, there is a direct line from CC Bloom's Crimson Curls to Hayley Williams' Tangerine Rebellion. And bear with me, but we're going to get there together. Both understood that the right shade could become your calling card, your statement of intent, your refusal to blend into the background. But while Cece's red hair was static, I mean a constant throughout her fictional journey, Hayley turned chromatic evolution into an art form, creating a visual language that would guide fans through 2 decades of musical metamorphosis. We're about to trace that journey in a minute, from Orange Rebellion to Blonde Prophecy, from Rainbow Chaos to Liberation Laboratory. All of those terms will make a whole lot of sense in just a few. But before we decode the cosmic significance of every pigment choice in Hayley's career, I want to clarify something about the language you'll hear throughout today's episode. When I talk about Hayley's visual strategy or fan psychology, or even say things like she weaponized her appearance, I am in no way suggesting anything manipulative or calculated in a cynical way. What I'm really describing is something just much more organic and beautiful, that Hayley developed this incredibly authentic connection with her fans, where her personal choices became part of an unspoken conversation between artist and fan. Long before social media made Easter eggs and hidden messages standard practice for musicians, Hayley seemed to be pioneering this intimate visual dialogue where a new hair color could signal creative shifts or personal growth. It wasn't about tricks or manipulation. It was about building genuine trust through consistency and transparency, creating a shared language that made fans feel like insiders in her artistic journey. So when I use businessy terms like strategy, I'm basically trying to sound smarter, and I'm simply trying to articulate how brilliant and intuitive her approach was, but not because it was some corporate marketing scheme, but because it came from a place of authentic connection, and that happened to work so incredibly well. If you are completely confused, that's what you get. No, I'm just kidding. That's a Paramore song. That's not what you get. I'm about to explain everything. So sit tight, hang out, and let's get into it. Let's talk about one of the most fascinating aspects of celebrity culture, the image reinvention. Now, there are reinventions that work so well they become cultural moments. Think Gaga's jazz era with Tony Bennett or Taylor Swift's Reputation Snake transformation. And then there are the ones that make you question everything, like Madonna's diamond encrusted dental accessories phase, where she showed up to red carpets looking like she'd raided Paul Wall's jewelry box. Or does everybody remember Justin Timberlake's Man of the Woods lumberjack cosplay era, complete with flannel, photo shoots in Tennessee forests that had everyone asking, but why though? What if I told you there was an artist who cracked the code completely? Someone who figured out how to make reinvention feel like true musical evolution instead of desperate pivots, who trained fans to read visual cues as more than just shrewd album marketing, turning personal renewal into a 20-year masterclass in audience psychology. That artist is none other than Hayley Williams, the much beloved diminutive singer of Paramore, who also happens to be a cutting edge style icon, a fierce mental health advocate, and the visionary founder of a hair color empire. From the moment she stepped out on the Shira Girl stage at Warped Tour in 2005, Hayley has weaponized her roots as a storytelling device. She's made her follicles into career GPS that's been guiding us through nearly 2 decades of musical evolution. And she's essentially created a visual conditioning system so sophisticated that fans could predict artistic direction based on her latest eye job. This year marks a pretty massive milestone for Hayley, as it's the anniversary of Paramore's debut album, All We Know Is Falling. And if that wasn't enough to celebrate, Hayley dropped 17 new solo tracks at the end of July, first released through her site as the Ego album, which matched with a limited edition Good Die Young shade with the same name. Because apparently, even surprise releases are more colorful when they come with their own chromatic announcements. Today, we're practicing some hairstrology. That's hair plus astrology for those keeping score, because we're about to decode the cosmic significance of every single pigment choice in Hayley Williams' career. We'll be examining how she transformed personal reinvention into a masterclass in change management disguised as beauty choices. We'll trace the psychology behind her visual strategy, explore how she turned salon appointments into fan prophecy, and examine what happens when the artist who made reinvention her brand decides to commercialize the very technique that made her famous. From Orange Rebellion to Blonde Prophecy, this is the story of how one teenager from Tennessee unintentionally reinvented the rule book for modern celebrity evolution, one shade at a time. Because when you really think about it, Hayley's hair has been a subliminal career compass all along, and most of us didn't even realize we were learning to read the signs. I can feel the pressure. It's getting closer now. We're better off without you. Feel the pressure. It's getting closer now. You're better off without me. Okay, let's start with what I am calling the Orange Rebellion, which is the foundational era from 2005 to 2011 that established Hayley's visual strategy and proved that authentic rebellion could coexist with astute career planning. The mid 2000s scene was a completely different place from what we know now. This was peak MySpace era, where your top 8 friends determined your social status, and everyone was desperately trying to get their hands on the new iPod Nano. The rock landscape was dominated by bands like Green Day and Blink 182, who'd proven that punk sensibilities could coexist with mainstream success, but the design was very much still dude centric. Enter the 16-year-old firecracker from Franklin, Tennessee, who'd somehow convinced her parents to let her join a band with a bunch of slightly older dudes she'd met through local music connections. As the story goes, Jeremy Davis and Josh Farrow had been playing together for a minute, heard about this girl with serious vocal chops, and asked her to come jam. What they found was someone with the technical skills to match their ambition and the natural charisma to become their focal point. But the industry's relationship with young female performers in 2005 was, well, complicated. This was Britney and Christina territory where teen girls in music were expected to either be wholesome role models or carefully manufactured rebels. The rock world wasn't much better. Female musicians were often relegated to either indie rock, manic pixie dream girls like Jenny Lewis or pop punk princess archetypes like Avril Lavigne. Hayley's signature Orange Revolution wasn't just a scene kid who stumbled across a tube of Manic Panic Hellfire dye. It was an intentional protest against all the misguided expectations the industry had for teen girls in music. The vibrant, impossible to ignore shade screamed, I don't belong here, and that's exactly the point. While other young women were trying to fit into pre existing categories, she chose to stand out violently. The shade itself was pure genius. Orange is the most psychologically stimulating hue in the spectrum. It demands attention without the aggression of red or the caution of yellow. It's the pigment of construction zones and traffic cones and things that you literally cannot ignore. When Hayley walked into a room full of kids with singed straight black locks, she became the only person your eyes could focus on. But the strategic brilliance goes deeper than just standing out. Orange became Hayley's visual anchor during Paramore's most foundational period, creating consistency even as everything else around their sound and image evolved. All We Know Is Falling established their emotional intensity, but it was Riot in 2007 that launched them into the stratosphere. And through both albums, that distinctive shade remained constant, her tonal North Star, while the band experimented with everything from traditional punk aggression to more melodic pop sensibilities. When Decode landed on the Twilight soundtrack in 2008, Paramore wasn't just another band contributing to a random movie compilation. They were a group with that girl with the unforgettable tangerine mane. That song became their biggest hit to date, and suddenly that chromatic choice translated into recognizable branding that helped them stand out in a soundtrack filled with established artists. During this period, her palette did evolve strategically. She experimented with darker cherry red variations, especially around this Decode era, but always within the warm spectrum that had become her signature. It was sort of like watching a master painter work within a specific family of shades. Enough variation to keep things exciting, but consistent enough to maintain visual identity. The Orange era also coincided with Paramore's transition from scrappy underdogs to legitimate rock stars, and Hayley's chromatic consistency provided stability during a period of massive change. They were teenagers figuring out fame in real time, dealing with tour schedules that would exhaust adults and industry pressures that would crush, crush, crush. Get it? Most people twice their age. But fans always knew what to expect visually, even as their sound matured and their personalities developed. What made this strategy so effective was how it worked on multiple levels simultaneously. Casual observers saw a distinctive look that made Hayley instantly recognizable in press photos and music videos. Dedicated fans began associating specific variations with different creative periods. The brighter copper tones during the Riot sessions versus the deeper auburn shades during more introspective Twilight moments. She was unconsciously training her audience to read visual cues as artistic indicators. But beneath the surface, the band dynamics were becoming increasingly complex. What fans didn't know, but always suspected, was that Hayley and lead guitarist Josh Farro had developed a romantic relationship that added layers of personal tension to their creative collaboration. Here was a teenage frontwoman navigating not just fame and industry pressure, but also a romantic relationship with her bandmate. And all this while maintaining the chromatic identity that had become central to Paramore's brand. By 2009, as they prepared to release Brand New Eyes, the orange had become so synonymous with Hayley Williams that any variation felt newsworthy to fans. When she occasionally experimented with slightly different tones, it generated speculation about the band's creative direction. She had accidentally created a feedback loop where her personal grooming choices became content for fan communities to analyze and discuss. The Orange Rebellion wasn't just about establishing visual identity, it was about claiming creative control in an industry that rarely gives female musicians agency over their own image. While other young artists were having their looks dictated by stylists and label executives, Haley was making bold choices that reflected her actual personality and artistic vision. But perhaps most importantly, this orange era established the psychological framework that would define her entire career approach. Fans learned to associate her chromatic evolution with creative evolution, setting up expectations that would serve her well during future reinventions. She was building trust through consistency, proving that change could be exciting instead of threatening when handled intentionally. As 2011 approached, Haley had accomplished something completely remarkable. She had created a visual identity so strong that it had become inseparable from Paramore's brand recognition, while simultaneously training her audience to expect and embrace evolution. She'd proven that a teen girl could control her own narrative in an industry designed to control her. The Orange Rebellion had been a complete success, but success, as it turns out, was about to become the least of her problems. Because just as fans had learned to trust her visual consistency, everything was about to fall apart. The romantic relationship with Josh was crumbling. Band members were preparing to quit. The rumors about the real story behind Paramore's success were threatening to destroy everything they'd built. When your world is imploding, sometimes the only response is to embrace the chaos completely. And that's exactly what Haley's hair was about to do. Welcome to what I am calling the Rainbow Chaos, which is the period from 2011 to 2013 when Hayley Williams turned personal and professional disaster into the most brilliant distraction technique in rock history. Remember just a few minutes ago how we established that Hayley had spent 6 years training fans to associate her visual evolution with creative evolution? Well, 2011 was about to put that psychological conditioning to the ultimate test. Because right when Paramore should have been celebrating the success of Brand New Eyes and planning their next career move, everything imploded. The Farrow brothers, Josh and Zach, quit the band in December 2010, citing, quote, creative differences, unquote, in the most diplomatic exit statement ever written. But fans were calling shade on the corporate speak, especially when Josh's subsequent blog post basically accused the band of being a manufactured vehicle built around Hayley, with everyone else reduced to backup players. The accusations had some merit. I mean, there had always been whispers about Hayley being the only one actually signed to Atlantic, but the timing was devastating. This was the moment when bands would have gone into major crisis management mode, held emergency meetings with publicists, and probably released some equally carefully crafted statement about artistic growth and mutual respect. Instead, you know how they say the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference? Well, Haley's response to the hubbub was to dye her locks bright pink and act like nothing had happened, which seems pretty cold, but also pretty iconic. The chromatic pivot was so sudden and so dramatic that it completely hijacked the news cycle. Instead of dissecting band drama, fans were losing their mind over the magenta transformation. Music blogs that should have been analyzing the implications of losing half your founding members were posting galleries of her new look. She had weaponized her visual strategy to redirect attention from disaster to excitement. But this was just the beginning of the kaleidoscope era. Over the next 2 years, Haley's palette became a constantly shifting spectrum of don't give a fucks. You had electric blue that looked like cotton candy, purple that bordered on violet, green so neon it seemed to glow under stage lights, and combinations that shouldn't have worked but absolutely did. Each new shade drop became its own event, generating enough social media buzz to keep Paramore trending even when they weren't releasing music. The psychological brilliance was chef's kiss. Fans were so distracted by what pigment is coming next that they missed the fact that the band was basically rebuilding from scratch. Taylor York, who'd been contributing to Paramore's songwriting for years, officially joined as lead guitarist. The touring lineup expanded to include additional musicians as well. They were essentially becoming a completely new group, but nobody was panicking about it because everyone was too busy speculating about whether Haley's next hair transformation would be rainbow ombre or solid turquoise. This is where her earlier investment in visual conditioning paid off in ways she probably never anticipated. Because she'd spent years proving that change could be thrilling rather than threatening, fans welcomed each new chromatic announcement with anticipation instead of anxiety. She trained them to trust her instincts. So when everything else about the band was uncertain, the one constant was their confidence in her ability to guide them through whatever came next. The timing of the rainbow chaos also coincided with the social media explosion that was transforming how musicians connected with their audiences. Instagram launched in 2010, Twitter was becoming essential for artists, and suddenly every shade reveal could become content that reached fans directly without going through traditional media gatekeepers. Haley wasn't just changing her own appearance, she was creating a steady stream of visual content that kept Paramore relevant during a period where they very easily could have disappeared. The 2013 self titled album became the perfect testing ground for whether this chaos management strategy actually worked. The music represented their most significant sonic evolution yet by incorporating electronic elements, pop elements, and a level of sonic sophistication that their earlier albums had only hinted at. Under normal circumstances, such a dramatic departure might have alienated longtime fans who'd grown attached to their punk adjacent sound. But by the time the album dropped, fans had already been conditioned to expect and embrace reinvention. The Rainbow Chaos had served as a visual warm up for the musical experimentation they were about to experience. When Still Into You hit radio with its polished pop production, it didn't feel like a betrayal of their roots. It felt like the most natural progression from a band whose visual identity had been preparing audiences for this moment. Still Into You became their biggest mainstream hit. The album debuted at number one, and suddenly Paramore was being discussed as a band that had successfully navigated the transition from scene darlings to legitimate pop rock powerhouses. The Rainbow Chaos hadn't just distracted from the band's internal drama, it had positioned them for their biggest commercial breakthrough yet. But perhaps most importantly, this period established Haley's reputation as someone who could turn personal turmoil into artistic opportunity. While other artists might have been paralyzed by the loss of founding members and a breakup with your first love, she'd found a way to make instability feel intentional. The constantly shifting palette became a metaphor for adaptation, proving that you could embrace uncertainty without losing your identity. As 2013 wound down, Hayley had accomplished something that seemed nearly impossible a mere 2 years earlier. She'd taken the band's most vulnerable moment and transformed it into their most successful era. The Rainbow Chaos had served its purpose flawlessly. Fans were more invested than ever, critics were taking them seriously as artists, and commercially, they were performing better than anyone could have predicted. But success has a way of making you nostalgic for the good old days, and Haley was about to test whether her psychological conditioning could work in reverse. Because just as fans had learned to embrace change, she was about to find out if they could be just as excited about going back to where it all started. Don't try to take this from me. Don't try to take this from me now. Don't try to take this from me. Don't try to take this from me now. Feels like I'm waking from the dead, and everyone's been waiting on me. At least now I never have to wonder what it's like to sleep a year away. So we've established that Hayley turned chaos into chromatic content and somehow made band drama disappear behind a polychromatic smokescreen. But 2013 was about to prove whether her subliminal conditioning could work in reverse, because sometimes the most radical move is going back to where you started. Remember that iconic tangerine shade that launched 1,000 scene kid makeovers? Well, guess what made its triumphant return right as Paramore was promoting their self-titled album? Here's a hint. It was that same iconic tangerine shade. This wasn't some coincidental throwback or creative drought. This was Hayley testing whether nostalgia could be used just as effectively as novelty, which is why I'm calling this the Nostalgia Orange Era, and it runs from roughly 2013 to 2017. Fans had spent 2 years being conditioned to expect constant change, so when she showed up with that signature orange glow again, it felt like coming home after a wild night out. Suddenly, everyone was having flashbacks to misery business and their childhood bedrooms covered in AP band posters. But they were experiencing those feelings through the lens of a more sophisticated, evolved version of the artist they'd grown up with. This is where her earlier investment in visual trust started to pay dividends in the way that would make Wall Street jealous. Throughout 2014 and 2015, she started leaving these sort of strategic hints. Forest green that looked like she'd been living in a fairy tale, electric blue that seemed to conduct energy, deep purple that bordered on mystical. Each shade felt like a limited edition drop, creating urgency around every transformation. Fans were collecting her looks like Pokemon cards, never knowing which variation would become the next iconic era. During this period, her personal life provided plenty of subplot material. Her relationship with Newfound Glory's Chad Gilbert had evolved from rebound romance to serious commitment. They got engaged in 2014, which coincided with some of her most adventurous pigment choices. It's almost like happiness gave her permission to take bigger risks, knowing she had emotional stability as her foundation. But relationships, as we know, can be so unpredictable. By 2016, what had seemed like a pop punk fairy tale romance was starting to show breakage that no amount of leave in moisturizing treatments could repair. The marriage that was supposed to be her happily ever after lasted exactly 11 months, ending in divorce papers filed in July 2017. While Hayley was dealing with very public relationship drama, her chromatic consistency kept fans focused on her artistry rather than her personal struggles. The strategic visual choices weren't just building brand recognition, they were protecting her privacy by giving people something else to analyze. And then came the move that retrospectively makes everything else look like the dress rehearsal. In 2016, while most of her pop peers were launching generic beauty lines or partnering with established cosmetic giants, Hayley did something that seems obvious in hindsight, but was absolutely next level. She launched Good Die Young with her longtime stylist, Brian O'Connor. Other artists were slapping their names on random products, and she was creating a business around the specific technique that had made her famous. The audacity is inspiring when you really think about it. She had spent over a decade training fans to associate chromatic evolution with artistic evolution, proving that change could be thrilling, not threatening. And then she turned around and said, "Want to try this for yourself?" She wasn't just modeling the behavior, she was teaching other people to do the same thing. The business model was pure genius because it solved a problem that traditional beauty brands never addressed. How do you make dramatic change feel safe? Most people want to reinvent themselves but are terrified of the mental and social consequences. Hayley had proven through her own career that transformation could be empowering rather than destructive, and now she was packaging that confidence for retail. Good Die Young wasn't competing with L'Oreal or Revlon, it was creating an entirely new category. This wasn't just about covering gray roots or following seasonal trends. This was using visual transformation as a tool for emotional evolution, sold by someone who'd been publicly demonstrating the technique since she was 16 years old. The timing also happened to align brilliantly with where social media culture was at, where everybody was becoming their own personal brand and originality was more important than ever. Instagram had turned everyone into their own art director, and suddenly regular people needed the same change management tools that had worked for professional performers. But perhaps most importantly, Good Die Young represented the ultimate validation of Hayley's visual strategy. And this approach wasn't only effective for rock stars, it was a universally applicable technique for anyone brave enough to use their appearance as a storytelling device. As 2017 approached, Hayley had successfully turned personal grooming into a legitimate business empire, while simultaneously using that empire to expand her artistic influence. The nostalgia orange era had proven that going backward could be just as powerful as moving forward, as long as you understand the psychological mechanisms behind why people respond to visual cues. But success has a way of making you restless. And Hayley was about to test whether her legacy could handle the biggest transformation yet. Because just as fans had learned to trust her ability to make the familiar feel fresh, she was preparing to show them what happened when everything they thought they knew about her appearance and her sound got turned completely upside down.
Hard times, gonna make you wonder why you even tried. Hard times, gonna take you down and left for you to cry. These times, and I still don't know how I even survived. Hard times, in order to get to rock bottom.
Allow me to introduce you to what I'm calling the blonde warning, which is the era from 2017 to 2020 when Hayley used chromatic transformation to announce the most dramatic artistic pivot of her career. Because while other artists announce major sonic shifts through interviews or cryptic social media posts, Hayley was ready to drop her next 180-degree metamorphosis, but she did it at the salon. The shift from blonde wasn't gradual or subtle. This was a complete color overhaul that made her look like she'd stepped through some sort of interdimensional portal and emerged as an entirely different person. Gone were the warm, vibrant tones that had defined her stylistic DNA for over a decade. In their place was this almost ethereal platinum shade that seemed to glow under the stage lights and made her appear both more mature and somehow otherworldly. Fans immediately knew something seismic was coming. She'd spent years training them to read aesthetic cues as artistic indicators. So when she showed up looking like she'd gotten the makeover montage treatment from a Shondaland procedural drama, speculation reached fever pitch. When Hard Times dropped in April 2017, it became clear that the blonde transformation hadn't been just a simple hair glow up. It had been advance notice of a complete genre pivot. The song sounded nothing like Paramore had ever created. It was synth heavy and dance influenced, with production that belonged more on a Robin album than anything resembling their alt rock foundation. The visual preparation had worked perfectly. Instead of fans being shocked or betrayed by this sonic departure, they'd already been mentally processing the change for months through her appearance. But let's talk about the deeper implications of going blonde in 2017, because it wasn't just about preparing fans for a new sound. This was Hayley signaling a fundamental shift in how she wanted to be perceived as an artist and as a woman. Blonde has specific cultural coding in American entertainment. It suggests sophistication, maturity, a certain type of polished professionalism that her previous pigment decisions had deliberately rejected. Yet blonde also carries another powerful association, and that's accessibility. Think of how celebrities like Emma Stone or Taylor Swift and Reese Witherspoon have used blonde hair to project approachability and relatability. The approachable blonde archetype makes stars seem more touchable to their audience, creating intimacy through familiarity. This duality, sophisticated yet accessible, polished yet personable, was exactly the balance Hayley needed as she prepared to reveal some of her most vulnerable songwriting. Remember, this was someone who'd spent her teens and early 20s using unconventional hair colors to stand out fiercely in an industry that expected young women to conform. The Orange Rebellion had been about refusing to fit into predetermined categories. But going blonde in her late 20s, this was about claiming space in categories she'd previously been excluded from, while maintaining the relatability that had always been central to her connection with fans. The timing coincided with some major life recalibrations. Zach Farrow had officially returned to the band as drummer in early 2017, bringing back a founding member just as they were embarking on their most experimental era. Her marriage to Chad Gilbert was dissolving, which meant she was navigating very public personal change alongside this artistic transformation. The blonde served as a protective coloring during what could have been an incredibly vulnerable period, simultaneously signaling strength through sophistication while maintaining approachability during emotional exposure. Here's where the armor concept becomes clear. Blonde hair historically functions as dual protection in entertainment. It's simultaneously vulnerable, think innocent, exposed, and it's also powerful, think controlled and polished. This emotional duality creates distance while appearing more open. Exactly the kind of contradictory shelter someone needs when they're about to reveal their deepest struggles wrapped in deceptively bright packaging. The connection to her later solo work, Petals for Armor, wasn't at all coincidental. She was already discovering how vulnerability could be used as both a weapon and a shield. After Laughter as an album was sonically adventurous in ways that could have alienated their core fan base, but months of aesthetic preparation had done the emotional heavy lifting. When songs like Told You So and Fake Happy reveal deeply personal lyrics about depression and relationship struggles, wrapped in these deceptively upbeat production choices, fans were ready to follow her into this more emotionally complex territory. The blonde era also marked a significant shift in how Hayley presented herself in interviews and public appearances. The vibrant, rebellious energy of her earlier periods was replaced by something more introspective and measured. She was talking openly about mental health struggles, the challenges of growing up in public, and the pressure of being seen as a role model for young women. The lighter locks seemed to reflect this more vulnerable, thoughtful version of herself. Throughout 2018 and 2019, she experimented with different blonde variations, sometimes platinum, sometimes with silver undertones, occasionally with subtle pastel highlights. Each shade felt like she was fine tuning not just her appearance, but her artistic identity. This wasn't the dramatic reinvention we'd seen during the Rainbow Chaos era. This was sophisticated evolution. The blonde period also coincided with some of her most politically vocal moments. In 2018, she made the decision to stop performing Misery Business Live due to lyrics that could be interpreted as slut shaming, sparking intense debate among longtime fans. The more mature appearance seemed to give her additional credibility when addressing these complex cultural conversations. She looked like someone who'd evolved beyond the perspectives that had shaped her teenage songwriting. But perhaps most significantly, the blonde warning proved that Hayley's visual telegraphing techniques could work for complete artistic reinvention, not just incremental evolution. After Laughter became their second number one album, proving that fans trusted her judgment enough to follow her into completely uncharted territory. The months of aesthetic prep had transformed what could have been a jarring surprise into an anticipated evolution. By 2020, as the world was shutting down due to the pandemic, Hayley had successfully transitioned from being seen as a pop punk princess to being recognized as a mature artist capable of sophisticated, emotional, and sonic complexity. The blonde transformation had served as the bridge between who she'd been and who she was becoming. But global isolation has a way of forcing introspection, and Haley was about to discover what happened when the visual conditioning techniques she'd perfected were applied to an audience of one, herself. Sometimes the most radical transformation isn't about changing how the world sees you, it's about changing how you see yourself.
This is why I don't leave the house. You say the coast is clear, but you won't catch me up. Oh, why? This is why.
The pandemic lockdown of 2020 did something unprecedented to Haley's visual strategy. It turned her hair into a private workshop where she could test different versions of herself without external pressure. And that's exactly why I'm naming this segment the Liberation Laboratory, which runs from 2020 to the present day. It's during this moment, and for the first time in her career, she could experiment with pigments without becoming immediate content, without generating speculation, and without serving any purpose beyond personal discovery. Each new shade became a hypothesis about identity. Some worked, some didn't, but all of them taught her something about who she was when the performance pressure disappeared. During early quarantine, while the rest of us were discovering sourdough starters and Tiger King, Haley was quietly embracing darker, more natural tones that seemed to signal artistic independence from Paramore's bright identity. The deep browns and subtle highlights weren't making any grand statements, they were just reflecting what she actually wanted to look like when nobody was watching. For someone who'd spent 15 years using her appearance as a marketing tool, and I say that without criticism or judgment, this represented genuine freedom. And from that freedom bloomed the singer's first solo project. Petals for Armor dropped in May 2020, and the aesthetic choices surrounding that release told a completely different story than anything we'd seen before. The album cover featured her in natural lighting with those darker, earthier tones, looking polar opposite from the platinum blonde rock star who headlined arenas during the After Laughter tour. The music matched the visual authenticity. Petals for Armor was hugely experimental, incorporating dark synths with acoustic vulnerability and production choices that belonged more in an art gallery than a rock club. Songs like Simmer and Dead Horse revealed layers of emotional complexity that her previous chromatic signals had only hinted at. She'd spent years training fans to expect evolution through visual cues, but this time the internal transformation had come first. What made this period particularly fascinating was how it demonstrated the difference between performing change and actually changing. Haley's previous eras had been about managing public perception through appearance, but this Liberation Laboratory was about using visual choices to explore personal identity. The natural tones weren't announcing anything to fans. They were helping her figure out who she wanted to be. By late 2020, as Flowers for Vases was taking shape, something interesting started happening. The more comfortable she became with this authentic self expression, the more adventurous her palette became again. And this time, the vibrant pigments weren't serving strategic purposes, they were reflecting creative confidence. She'd learned the difference between changing for an audience and changing for artistic fulfillment. Flowers for Vases in February 2021 represented peak Liberation Laboratory thinking. The album was raw, intimate, and sonically brave in ways that felt completely unfiltered. Her appearance during this period reflected that same fearlessness. Sometimes natural, sometimes experimental, always authentic to whatever creative phase she was exploring. She'd broken the psychological connection between visual transformation and career strategy, freeing herself to make choices based purely on artistic instinct. The business implications were equally revolutionary. Good Die Young continued expanding through this period, but the messaging evolved from transform like a rock star to transform for yourself. The brand started attracting a different demographic, people using chromatic change for personal empowerment rather than social performance. The LGBTQ plus community particularly embraced the products as tools for authentic self expression, and Hayley's vocal advocacy for queer rights gave the brand additional cultural significance beyond just beauty. Good Die Young customers versus traditional beauty brand users represented completely different approaches to transformation. While conventional products promised to help you fit beauty standards, Hayley's line encouraged people to create their own standards. The difference was empowerment versus conformity, and the community that formed around the brand reflected those values. But perhaps the most significant development came in February 2023 when Paramore returned with This Is Why. The band's reunion coincided with Hayley embracing vibrant tones again, but with a crucial difference. She looked like someone who'd chosen to return rather than someone who'd never left. Then, about 8 months later, Paramore dropped the This Is Why remix album featuring artists like Foles, Panda Bear, Claude, and Domi and JD Beck, which showed just how comfortable she'd become with artistic collaboration and experimentation. Her visual choices during this period reflected that same openness, confident enough in her own identity to play with different styles without losing herself in the process. The This Is Why era also brought an unexpected collaboration that validated everything from Hayley's approach to change management. When Taylor Swift invited Paramore to open for multiple dates of the Eras Tour in 2023, this was the ultimate crossover event. The two artists who'd mastered the art of fan relationships sharing the same stage. And because fans had been watching the friendship between Hayley and Taylor only grow stronger throughout the years, it felt like the universe had aligned for this long awaited friendship goals moment. Throughout 2023 and early 2024, the Liberation Laboratory continued producing results. Hayley's chromatic experiments became increasingly unpredictable, sometimes natural, sometimes boldly experimental, always reflecting actual creative states rather than strategic timelines. She was treating her hair like a mood ring for artistic authenticity, each shade revealing something genuine about her internal creative process rather than telegraphing calculated career moves. The Liberation Laboratory's true success became undeniable in July 2025 when Hayley released a collection of solo tracks initially presented as the Ego album. Unlike every previous era, this drop felt truly spontaneous. No months of visual preparation, no gradual conditioning, just 17 songs that appeared on her website, requiring a passcode from Good Die Young to access. Yes, the synergy was there, but it felt natural, not calculated. The release strategy represented everything this artistic freedom had taught her. She could trust her instincts, and her fans would follow her anywhere. And she didn't need elaborate digital marketing campaigns to generate excitement. The music was strong enough to stand on its own, and her relationship with her audience was secure enough to handle surprise releases. Musically, The Ego felt like the culmination of everything she'd learned during this particularly introspective period. The songs incorporated elements from her entire discography, the emotional honesty of Petals for Armor, the sonic experimentation of Flowers for Vases, and the accessibility of Paramore's recent work, but filtered through someone who'd finally learned to create for herself first and the audience second.
Got too big for my bridges, too big for my fishes. The sea got shallower every day. I danced, I said my prayers, it never rained. And I just want to be in California.
What we just traced isn't just the evolution of one artist's appearance. It's a true masterclass in audience development disguised as personal expression. Over 20 years, Hayley Williams developed and refined techniques that most brand strategists would pay millions to understand, and she did it all while appearing to simply follow her creative instincts. The genius lies in how she solved the fundamental challenge every long term artist faces